That night, I attended a colleague's party and we had a great time. Before I realized it, it was already late. I turned down a friend's offer to drive me home, thinking I could walk. It was a route I'd walked countless times before. The streets were quiet, with only a few dim streetlights casting weak pools of light on the scattered leaves and stones. The cool air carried the crispness of an autumn night. I started down the familiar path, my footsteps echoing slightly on the empty street. After a few minutes, I heard another set of footsteps behind me, soft and light, like someone following me. I stopped and listened carefully, but the only sounds were the distant hum of a car and the rustling of leaves. I shook my head, convincing myself it was just the wind or maybe my own footsteps echoing back. I continued walking, but then as I took another step, I heard it again, those same footsteps, closer and more distinct this time. My heart started to race. I quickly glanced over my shoulder, but there was no one there. The street was empty, bathed in a faint yellow glow. I could see nothing but my own elongated shadow. A shiver ran down my spine, and I told myself I was just being paranoid. Still, I quickened my pace. The footsteps behind me also seemed to pick up speed, matching my own. I abruptly stopped, and the footsteps stopped as well. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't dare look back again. Trying to keep my composure, I turned into a narrower alley, hoping to shake off whoever or whatever was following me. But as soon as I stepped into the alley, I heard the footsteps again, this time louder and more deliberate. Panic surged through me, and I broke into a run, sprinting down the alley with my heart pounding in my chest. The wind whipped past my ears, and I thought I could hear those footsteps still pursuing me, growing closer. Finally, I reached my apartment building, nearly tripping on the steps in my haste. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking, and kept glancing behind me, expecting to see someone emerge from the shadows. At last, I managed to get the key into the lock, shove the door open, and slam it shut behind me, quickly bolting it. I stood there, leaning against the door, gasping for breath. I peered through the peephole, scanning the street outside. It was empty, completely still, the streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. No sign of anyone. Slowly, my heart rate began to settle, and I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. But just as I was about to turn away, I heard a soft knock on the door. 3 gentle taps, slow and deliberate. I froze, my heart leaping back into my throat. Who could it be at this hour? I hadn't invited anyone over. I held my breath, listening intently, but there was only silence. I began to wonder if I had imagined it, but then the knocks came again, 3 distinct, steady knocks on the door. I cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole once more. My heart nearly stopped. I saw a pale face pressed against the glass, lips curled into a strange, unsettling smile. A cold wave of fear washed over me, paralyzing me in place. I dared not make a sound, my eyes locked on that eerie face. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the face vanished. A faint, low chuckle drifted through the door, a sound filled with malicious amusement, growing fainter and fainter until it finally faded away into the night. I stood there, gripping the doorknob tightly, my body trembling uncontrollably. I knew the person, whoever they were, had gone, but the fear lingered, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat by the door with all the lights on, afraid that face might reappear. As soon as morning came, I called a moving company and decided to leave that street for good. I never walked home alone at night again. The feeling of being watched still haunts me, as if those eyes are always on me, just waiting for the next time. My old friend Jack and I decided to go night fishing at the lake. It was our first time enjoying such a moment together in years. The lake, bathed in moonlight, looked calm and serene. A light breeze blew, carrying a chill through the air. We picked a quiet spot, cast our lines, and started fishing. As the lines arched through the air and landed in the water, our conversation flowed easily. We talked about work, family, and the adventures we had back in the day. As night fell, the surroundings grew quieter, and all we could hear was the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. Suddenly, Jack's fishing line tightened sharply. I tensed up, thinking he had caught a big fish. Jack excitedly began to reel it in, but I quickly noticed his expression change. His movements slowed, and a look of confusion and fear crossed his face. The line grew tighter and heavier, as if something unseen was resisting. I moved closer to help, and the fishing line slowly began to surface. I saw a faint white shape in the water, and a sudden sense of dread washed over me. Gradually, the pale object emerged from the lake, and my breath caught in my throat. A pale hand was floating in the water, rigid and extended, its fingers swaying slightly as if waving beneath the surface. I stepped back, my heart pounding wildly. This was not normal. Jack dropped his fishing rod, stepping back as well, his eyes fixed on the water, his face as white as a sheet. Just as I was trying to make sense of what I was seeing, a sharp scream rang out from across the lake, cutting through the night air. I turned quickly and saw a figure standing on the opposite shore, frantically waving its arms. The figure's movements seemed both urgent and desperate, as if trying to warn us of something, but they were too far away for me to hear what they were saying. A chill ran down my spine, and I realized we could not stay here any longer. Jack and I hurriedly packed up our things, tossing the gear into the car, ready to leave. But as I was about to get in, I glanced back at the lake and noticed that the water had become unnaturally calm, as if everything that had just happened was a figment of our imagination. My heart started pounding again, and I felt an unsettling sensation of being watched. I instinctively looked back toward the opposite shore, but the figure was gone. Only the empty shore and the dark, unfathomable water remained. The air was thick with a sense of tension, as if something unseen was slowly creeping closer. We jumped into the car, and I quickly started the engine, speeding away from that eerie place. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure reappear. The night outside was silent, but I felt something invisible was following closely. My unease grew stronger, and sweat trickled down my back. When we reached the town, we decided to report our experience to the police. After hearing our story, the officers exchanged strange, serious looks. They told us that the area around the lake was notorious for disappearances, and the last reported missing person had been seen on the shore that night, the very man we had seen screaming. A heavy feeling sank in my chest as I recalled the pale hand floating in the lake and the figure that had mysteriously vanished. The police said the lake had a reputation for being strange, with many claiming to have witnessed odd occurrences, though no one had ever been able to explain them. Leaving the station, Jack and I barely spoke. The car was eerily quiet, each passing second weighing heavily on me. I couldn't stop replaying the events at the lake in my mind. The floating hand and the scream from across the water felt like an invisible grip on my heart, making it hard to breathe. After dropping Jack off at his home, I continued driving back to mine. The entire way, I felt as if something was following the car. I checked the rearview mirror several times, but there was nothing there. My anxiety grew, and the air seemed thick with a sense of foreboding. When I finally got home, I locked all the doors and windows, but I still couldn't calm down. Suddenly, my phone rang, a call from an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. A low voice on the other end said only 2 words, "Don't return." I hung up, terror washing over me like a cold wave from my feet up. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, unable to sleep. The lake had become an endless nightmare, echoing in my mind. Even today, I still can't explain what happened that night, but one thing is certain, I will never go back to that lake again. It was a stormy night, and I was on my own, working the night shift at the remote animal shelter on the outskirts of town. The rain pounded heavily on the roof, creating a low, constant roar, and lightning occasionally lit up the sky, illuminating the surrounding woods for a brief moment before plunging everything back into darkness. My eyelids felt heavy. The night shifts were always long and lonely. Suddenly, the dogs in the shelter began barking wildly, their frantic howls cutting sharply through the sound of the rain. Startled, I quickly stood up, grabbed a flashlight, and headed toward the kennels. All the dogs seemed unusually agitated, pawing at the ground, baring their teeth, their eyes filled with a fear I had never seen before. I moved closer, trying to calm them, but then I noticed a strange smell in the air, a mix of wet earth and something rotten. I stepped outside the shelter, immediately feeling the rain drench my clothes. I swept the flashlight beam across the yard, and that's when I saw it. Strange marks in the mud. The prints looked like they belonged to some large animal, but their shape was odd, almost unnatural. There were 5 long, sharp claw marks, deeply embedded in the muddy ground, stretching from the back door of the shelter toward the edge of the woods. A chill ran down my spine as I carefully examined the area, finding no other signs. I turned to head back inside, but just then a flash of lightning lit up the sky, and I saw a dark shape moving at the far end of the yard. It was blurry, its outlines strange and distorted, and it seemed to be slowly coming closer. My heartbeat quickened, and I felt sweat mix with the rain running down my face. I held my breath, keeping my eyes fixed on the shape. Every time the lightning flashed again, it would disappear into the shadows, only to reappear closer with the next flash. Its form was unclear, but it radiated an inexplicable sense of menace, as if it didn't belong to this world. I turned and rushed back to the shelter door, but as I stepped inside, the door suddenly slammed shut behind me. I grabbed the handle and tried to open it, but it was locked tight. I banged on the door, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. The dogs' barking grew even more frantic, as if they sensed something terrible approaching. Then, I heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from outside, deep and raspy, unlike any animal I had ever heard before. Every hair on my body stood on end. I picked up the shelter's landline phone and dialed for help, but all I heard on the other end was a hollow, echoing sound, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. Suddenly, there was a loud thud against the window. I turned my flashlight toward it and saw a pair of cold, glowing eyes staring straight at me. The eyes were deep and haunting, filled with a hunger and malice that made my skin crawl. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. The eyes never blinked, fixed on me for what felt like an eternity, and then they slowly disappeared back into the darkness. I stood frozen, afraid to move, barely daring to breathe. Then I heard footsteps outside, a wet, dragging sound, as if something heavy was being pulled across the ground. I grabbed an iron rod from the wall and leaned against it, preparing myself for whatever might come. The footsteps stopped at the door, and I heard a faint knocking, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Each knock felt like it was hammering directly on my heart. I didn't dare answer, didn't dare move. The air was thick with tension, and for a moment, everything seemed to stand still. Then I heard the sound of the door lock slowly turning, as if an icy hand was gently twisting the knob. I held my breath, staring at the doorknob as it slowly turned, but the door didn't open. The footsteps resumed, circling the building, like something searching for another way in. I heard a light scratching on the window, like claws scraping against the glass. My heart pounded faster, as if it might burst from my chest. I knew I had to get out of there. I carefully made my way to the back door, hoping to find another exit, but it was also locked. Just as I was about to lose hope, the dog's barking suddenly stopped, and everything fell eerily silent, save for the rain hammering on the roof. Then, a low growl echoed through the air, closer this time. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I decided to risk it and jump out of the window. As soon as I pushed the window open, a blast of cold wind hit me, and I leapt out, landing hard in the mud. I scrambled to my feet and ran into the depths of the woods, rain lashing against my face, darkness swallowing everything around me. I heard the low growl behind me, fading, but still there, following me. I ran for what felt like hours, my legs burning with every step until I could barely feel them. Finally, I saw the road ahead, headlights piercing through the rain-soaked night. I ran toward the light, praying silently, never daring to look back. That night I escaped the animal shelter, but I knew I had lost the courage to ever return. Even now, I can still remember those cold, glowing eyes and the knocking at the door. On every stormy night, it feels as if they never truly went away, only waiting for another chance to find me again. That's today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the notification bell. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.